The Duke served his wife an annulment before 200 guests. She asked for the piano. By dawn, you will no longer be my wife. Adrian's words were colder than the annulment papers he placed in Eleanor's hands. Before 200 guests, the Duke of Blackmere accused her of hiding a binding promise to another man. The letter used as proof carried her seal, her phrases, and the name of Elias Wren, the music master who had died before he could defend her. Adrian expected tears. Instead, Eleanor asked whether the orchestra had tuned the grand piano that afternoon. Laughter moved through the room. Only the elderly instrument keeper stopped smiling. Eleanor had heard one incorrect note during the concert, a note deliberately flattened in the same unusual manner Elias once used to warn her that a manuscript had been altered. The petition and the evening's music were somehow connected. "Allow me one final performance," she said. Adrian refused, until Eleanor whispered the name of the person who had ordered the piano locked. Lord Silas Ashcombe. Her husband's expression changed for no more than a heartbeat. Silas, Adrian's cousin and heir presumptive, stood beneath the eastern gallery, with one hand resting upon his silver-topped cane. He appeared as composed as ever, his pale waistcoat immaculate, his smile touched with precisely measured concern. Beside him waited Lady Cecily Hartwell, the wealthy young woman whom society had once expected Adrian to marry. "You are mistaken," Adrian said quietly. "Silas has had no part in tonight's arrangements. Then someone has used his name." Eleanor looked toward Mr. Bell, the instrument keeper. The old man lowered his eyes. That small surrender confirmed more than any confession might have done. Adrian's fingers tightened around the petition. "You have 5 minutes." A murmur passed through the guests as he motioned for a footman to open the piano. The servant bent over the brass lock, fumbled with the key, then tried again. "It does not fit, Your Grace." Mr. Bell stepped forward. "That is not the proper key." Every face turned toward him. The old man's hands trembled against his black coat. "The lock was changed this afternoon," I protested, "but the gentleman carried a written order bearing Lord Silas's signature." Silas gave a soft, incredulous laugh. "A forged order, evidently. How convenient that Her Grace should discover another forgery, moments after the first." Several guests smiled. Eleanor felt the cruelty of it. Every new irregularity could now be made to look like part of her defense. Whoever had planned this had not merely produced evidence. They had arranged the room so that truth itself would sound desperate. Adrian summoned the footman carrying the concert programs. "Break the lock." "Your Grace," Silas interjected. "The instrument belongs to the Royal Musical Relief Fund. Damaging it before these witnesses would hardly improve the evening." "The piano stands in my house." The footman wedged a fireplace poker beneath the narrow lid. Wood cracked. A woman gasped as though violence had been done to a living creature. When the lid lifted, Eleanor did not sit. She first examined the keyboard. The altered E-flat responded sluggishly beneath her finger. A faint grey powder marked the ivory's edge. Graphite, she thought. The sort a copyist used to amend scores before committing corrections to ink. She pressed the note again. Its muted tone was not caused by poor tuning. Something had been placed inside the mechanism to restrain the hammer. Elias had used the same warning only twice during her girlhood. Whenever a patron ordered him to change a composition and conceal the alteration, he flattened one note during rehearsal. It told Eleanor to trust neither the printed score nor the person who had supplied it. She lifted the music desk. The evening's principal composition, the Blackmere Variations, lay open where the orchestra master had left it. Eleanor turned to the passage containing the false note. 4 measures had been pasted over with newer paper. The repair was skillful enough to escape a casual glance, but the grain ran in the wrong direction. Her pulse quickened. Those measures repeated a melody written by her mother 20 years earlier, the same melody from which several intimate phrases in the incriminating letter had been taken. "Play it," Adrian commanded. Eleanor placed her hands above the keys, but Mr. Bell seized her wrist. "Do not, Your Grace." The terror in his face silenced the room. He released her immediately and stepped back. Beneath the cuff of his coat, a dark bruise encircled his wrist. Eleanor looked from the old man to the altered score, then toward Silas. Her husband's cousin was no longer smiling. She understood then that the annulment was not the conclusion of the scheme, it was the distraction. While 200 witnesses watched her lose her name, someone had ensured that no one would ask what had been hidden inside the Duke's piano, or why Eleanor had to be expelled from Blackmere House before dawn. Eleanor lowered her hands without striking another key. "What has been placed inside it, Mr. Bell?" The old man swallowed, his gaze fixed upon the floor. Before he could answer, Silas crossed the room and demanded that Adrian remove a frightened servant from the presence of their guests. Eleanor saw the trap closing. If Mr. Bell spoke without proof, Silas would portray him as her accomplice. If he remained silent, the altered score could disappear before morning. "He acted upon my instructions," she said. Mr. Bell stared at her in alarm. Adrian's face hardened. "You ordered the piano tampered with." "I asked him to protect my mother's compositions from unauthorized copying. It was not a complete lie. For 3 years, Eleanor had entrusted Mr. Bell with the manuscripts donated to Blackmere's charitable concerts. By claiming responsibility now, however, she made herself appear capable of arranging the very deception of which she stood accused. Silas seized the advantage at once. "Then Her Grace admits that the instrument keeper serves her private purposes." "I admit that I trusted an honorable man," Eleanor replied. "That is not yet a crime, even in this house." Adrian dismissed the guests to the supper rooms and ordered 2 footmen to guard the piano. No one was to remove the score or touch the mechanism. It was the first sensible decision he had made since presenting the petition, yet it came too late to soften the humiliation. When the doors closed behind the last whispering noble, Adrian turned to Eleanor. "You will remain in the West Apartments until your carriage leaves at dawn." "And Mr. Bell? He will be questioned." Eleanor stepped between the old man and Silas. "Then I shall attend. You are in no position to make demands." "No, Your Grace. I am in the position of a woman accused by a dead man through a letter no living witness saw him write." Adrian flinched, but Silas advised him not to prolong the spectacle. Eleanor was escorted upstairs by Mrs. Finch, her widowed companion, who had not abandoned her when the other ladies withdrew. In the West Apartments, servants were already packing gowns into trunks. 3 years of marriage had been reduced to folded silk, locked boxes, and labels bearing the name of a house she was forbidden to keep. Eleanor went directly to the small music room adjoining her bedchamber. Her mother's walnut cabinet stood against the wall, apparently untouched. Music had never been an ornament to Eleanor. Her mother, Anne Vale, had composed sonatas that publishers purchased cheaply and issued beneath men's names. She had taught her daughter harmony, notation, paper quality, and the habits of dishonest copyists. "A thief may imitate the melody," Anne had once said, "but he rarely understands why every note must be where it is." After her mother's death, Eleanor had spent 7 years cataloguing every surviving manuscript. She intended to publish them under Anne's own name and use the proceeds to establish a small academy where daughters without fortunes might earn their living as teachers and copyists. Adrian had promised not to interfere with that work. Now an annulment would return Eleanor's settlement to the control of her elder brother, who had already tried twice to sell the collection. Mrs. Finch closed the door. "You should have let Bell defend himself." Silas wanted him frightened into making a careless accusation. Eleanor knelt before the cabinet. and I needed Silas to believe I had acted only from loyalty. She took a narrow key from the chain beneath her sleeve. The lock opened, but the cabinet door resisted. Someone had forced the lower hinge and then pressed it back into place. Inside, the shelves appeared orderly, bound scores above, correspondence below, copied parts arranged by composer. Eleanor checked them by touch rather than sight. One volume was missing, the black folio containing her mother's unfinished sonata and the private correction system Elias had helped preserve. Mrs. Finch covered her mouth. "When did you last see it?" "Yesterday afternoon. I locked it here before rehearsals." A soft knock came from the servants' passage. Mr. Bell slipped inside, breathless, carrying the written order that had authorized the piano lock to be changed. "They released me when His Grace demanded to question me himself," he said. "But there is something you must know. The piano was not merely locked. It was taken into the lower workshop for 40 minutes, and I was kept outside." He gave Eleanor the order. Silas's signature looked genuine, but the red sealing wax bore a strand of gold thread impressed along one edge. Eleanor had seen that thread before, on the ribbons used to bind her private manuscript folios. Mrs. Finch glanced toward the violated cabinet. Perhaps they stole the music tonight. Eleanor examined the cold ashes in the fireplace, the dried mud beneath the window, and the thin layer of dust already settled over the broken hinge. "No," she said. "The cabinet was opened before the concert." On the writing table lay an official inventory prepared by Adrian's solicitor, stating that every object in the West Apartments had been inspected and sealed only after the annulment was announced. Yet the inventory listed the missing black folio by its exact title, a title written nowhere on its cover. Whoever prepared the document had known what was inside the cabinet before the room was supposedly searched. Mr. Bell leaned over the inventory, his bruised hand hovering above the line that named Anne Vale's unfinished sonata. "I never spoke that title aloud," he said, "not even to the orchestra master." Mrs. Finch confirmed that the words appeared only inside Eleanor's private catalogue, which had been kept beneath the missing folio. Eleanor placed the inventory beside the written order authorizing the new piano lock. Both documents had been prepared on the solicitor's cream paper, but the order carried a faint indentation beneath Silas's signature. She laid a blank sheet over it and rubbed the side of a pencil gently across the surface. Letters emerged from the pressure left by whatever had been written on the sheet above. North account, payment before noon. The door opened before she could uncover the remaining words. Adrian entered without Silas, his evening coat unbuttoned, and his expression stripped of the cold ceremony he had worn downstairs. "Bell told me you found something in the inventory." Eleanor showed him the title of the missing folio, the damaged hinge, and the pencil rubbing. "Your solicitor claims this room was first inspected after you announced the annulment. Yet his inventory identifies a manuscript that can only be named by opening my locked cabinet. Either your solicitor entered before the time he recorded, or someone supplied him with information obtained here." Adrian studied the broken hinge. "Why would anyone steal your mother's music? Perhaps the music was not what they wanted." She pointed to the words revealed beneath the order. "What is the North account?" His silence lasted too long. "An estate reserve. Controlled by whom?" "My trustees, including Silas." Adrian folded the rubbing before answering. "You are attempting to turn a question of your deception into an accusation against my family." Eleanor felt the familiar wall descend between them. During their marriage, Adrian had listened whenever she spoke of tenants, schools, or concerts, but the moment she approached the locked chambers of Blackmere's finances, he treated inquiry as disloyalty. "The accusation against me was built from material taken from this cabinet," she said. "Your family entered the matter first. A clock in the corridor struck 2. Her carriage was due in 4 hours. Eleanor asked for 60 minutes in the concert hall before her departure. Adrian refused, until she offered him a measurable bargain. If the altered piano revealed nothing connected to the missing folio or the estate reserve, she would leave without contesting the immediate separation. She would still answer the annulment petition through the courts, but she would not delay her removal from Blackmere House. If she found a connection, Adrian would postpone her departure for 24 hours and allow Mr. Bell to remain in her presence. The concession placed her reputation, manuscripts, and proposed academy at risk, yet without time and access, she would lose all three regardless. Adrian agreed. They returned to the concert hall with Mrs. Finch and Mr. Bell. Silas was waiting beside the piano. His gaze settled first upon the pencil in Eleanor's hand, and then upon Adrian. Surely this performance has gone on long enough. 1 hour, Adrian said. By my authority. Silas stepped aside, but Eleanor saw his thumb tighten against the head of his cane. Mr. Bell removed the piano's front panel and exposed the action. Eleanor pressed the altered E-flat, while he watched the corresponding hammer rise and stop short of the string. A narrow black wedge had been inserted behind the mechanism. Using the small tweezers from Mrs. Finch's sewing case, Eleanor drew it free. It was not wood or felt, but tightly folded paper, darkened with graphite. 3 more hammers had been restrained in the same way, though their notes had not been played during the evening's principal piece. Eleanor extracted each wedge and unfolded them upon a clean handkerchief. Their torn edges matched. When she arranged them together, fragments of engraved lettering appeared across the paper. Blackmere Northern Improvement Security. Below the title remained part of a serial number and the lower curve of a blue crown watermark. Adrian picked up one fragment, and the colour left his face. These certificates are kept in the estate strongroom. Are they valuable? Mrs. Finch asked. £5,000 each, he replied. Silas recovered first. Discarded printer's waste can be obtained anywhere. Her Grace has already admitted directing Bell's actions. Eleanor stopped Adrian before he could return the fragment to the handkerchief. She placed all 4 pieces inside Mrs. Finch's empty ivory needle case, closed it, and asked Adrian to seal the join with his signet. Mr. Bell and Mrs. Finch added their signatures to a strip of paper wrapped around the case, recording the hour and the exact place of discovery. Silas watched the procedure with open displeasure. A theatrical precaution, he said. A necessary one, Eleanor answered, when papers have begun moving through locked rooms. Mr. Bell then examined the graphite on the fragments beneath a lamp. These wedges were fitted after I tuned the instrument at noon. The graphite is still loose, and the folds are fresh. Adrian turned to Silas. Who entered the hall after Bell finished? Silas named 2 footmen, the orchestra master and the solicitor, insisting that dozens of servants might have passed unnoticed. Eleanor looked at the 4 altered hammers and compared their notes with the pasted measures in the Blackmere variations. They were identical to the notes missing from her mother's stolen folio, but they had been placed in reverse order. No careless repairman could have produced that pattern. Someone had used pieces of a valuable Blackmere security to silence precisely 4 notes, locked the piano under Silas's name, and arranged for Eleanor to be expelled before she could examine it. The mistake was not accidental, and neither was the annulment. Adrian honoured the bargain before Silas could object. He postponed Eleanor's departure for 24 hours, ordered every entrance to the concert hall guarded, and summoned Mr. Nathan Rowe, the family solicitor, together with Blackmere's resident comptroller. Rowe arrived carrying the same leather case from which he had drawn the annulment petition. He was a narrow man, with careful hands, and a habit of answering only after glancing at Silas. When Adrian showed him the paper fragments sealed inside Mrs. Finch's needle case, Rowe declared that the serial number was too incomplete to identify. Eleanor said nothing. She had already recognized that the 4 altered notes corresponded to the 4th, 2nd, 7th, and 1st measures of her mother's sonata. Applied to the visible digits on the torn security, that order produced a complete certificate number. She withheld the observation because Silas still believed the reversed notes were meaningless. Revealing everything would only teach him which evidence needed to vanish next. They moved to the library, where the comptroller opened the North account register. The certificate Eleanor had identified was recorded as intact in the estate strongroom, yet a notation in Rowe's hand stated that it had been presented 3 weeks earlier as collateral for a loan of £5,000. It must be a clerical duplication, Rowe said. One entry should have been cancelled. Silas placed a reassuring hand upon Adrian's shoulder. This is precisely why I advised a private examination of the northern securities. I had begun to suspect irregularities before tonight. Eleanor looked at him. Then why did you call the paper printer's waste? Silas's hand fell. Because I had not yet seen the register. You also said the piano had been altered at my direction. Which notes were restrained? The E-flat that everyone heard. There were 4. Adrian lifted his gaze from the ledger. You watched Bell remove them. I was concerned with the security, not a musical exercise. Yet you now claim the exercise formed part of an examination you advised. The room became still. It was the first time Adrian had challenged his cousin rather than Eleanor, and Silas's expression hardened before smoothing into injured patience. Rowe interrupted by praising Adrian's foresight in ordering the piano opened. He spoke as though the Duke had recognized the altered notes, reconstructed the certificate number, and preserved the fragments. Eleanor allowed him to steal the discovery. Adrian did not. My wife found them, he said. The word wife appeared to surprise him as much as it did everyone else. He turned to Eleanor. Show me how you obtained the number. She arranged 4 blank cards upon the desk and wrote 1 visible digit on each. Then she marked the measures from her mother's sonata above them and reversed the order in which the notes had appeared. The complete number matched the register entry. Adrian followed every movement, no longer looking for hysteria or deceit, but for the limits of her reasoning. Could someone unfamiliar with the sonata have done this? He asked. Only if that person possessed my mother's black folio or the private catalogue explaining her corrections, both of which were in your cabinet yesterday. Yes. He absorbed the answer without apology. Respect was not absolution, Eleanor reminded herself. A man could admire her intelligence and still have chosen to disgrace her before 200 people. Nevertheless, when he asked his next question, he asked it as one investigator consulting another. What should be examined first? The original security in the strong room. Do not announce which number we seek until it is in your hand. Adrian sent the comptroller with 2 witnesses, excluding both Silas and Rowe. While they waited, voices gathered beyond the library doors. Many guests had not departed. News of the annulment had spread through the supper rooms, and several ladies were already composing accounts for friends in London. Lady Cecily entered without invitation and approached Adrian with public sympathy, telling him that no honourable man could be expected to shelter a woman suspected of bigamy and theft. Eleanor noticed Silas watching Cecily, as if measuring the success of a rehearsed line. Mr. Bell, standing near the shelves, began to shake. Cecily pointed toward him. That servant should be detained before he carries more of Her Grace's property out of the house. Silas agreed, and produced the written order bearing his own signature. He argued that Bell must have forged it to gain private access to the piano. A local magistrate remained among the guests, he added, and could issue a warrant immediately. Bell's granddaughter depended upon his wages, and an arrest would destroy the family, even if he were later acquitted. Eleanor stepped forward. Mr. Bell entered the concert hall because I asked him to examine my mother's manuscripts. If his access is treated as criminal, then the responsibility is mine. Adrian's jaw tightened. "You have already taken that burden once. Because it is true that I trusted him." "It is not true that he stole a security." Silas demanded that Eleanor surrender her personal keys and submit her trunks to inspection if she wished to stand as Belle's guarantor. The request exceeded any reasonable precaution, but refusing would leave the old man exposed. Eleanor placed her keyring on the desk. "My trunks may be examined in the presence of Mrs. Finch and 2 neutral witnesses. Neither Lord Silas nor Mr. Rowe is to enter the room." Adrian accepted those terms and ordered Belle released into Mrs. Finch's supervision. Silas smiled, as though Eleanor had granted him exactly what he wanted. The comptroller returned from the strong room, carrying a certificate with the number Eleanor had reconstructed. It appeared intact, complete with Adrian's embossed seal and the blue crown watermark. Rowe exhaled in relief and declared the piano fragments worthless. Eleanor compared the certificate with the sealed pieces. The paper matched, but the blue crown on the certificate faced left. The partial crown on the fragments faced right. One of them had been produced from a reversed printing plate. "This is not the original," she said. "It is a duplicate made to resemble it." Adrian asked Rowe why the estate possessed 2 versions of the same security. The solicitor could offer no answer. Silas moved toward the door, claiming he would prevent the remaining guests from spreading further scandal. Through the narrow opening, Eleanor saw him summon the magistrate and whisper to one of the servants assigned to search her luggage. The servant received a small object wrapped in black cloth before hurrying toward the west apartments. Silas no longer intended merely to send Eleanor away. He intended to ensure that when her trunks were opened, they would provide a new reason to take her away by force. Eleanor did not wait for Silas to return. She told Adrian what she had seen and asked him to stop the servant before he reached the west apartments. Adrian dispatched a footman, but Silas re-entered the library at once and demanded to know why his movements were being treated as criminal. "I gave Harrow a prayer book belonging to Lady Cecily," he said. "The poor girl left it in the supper room." Lady Cecily confirmed that a small volume bound in black cloth was missing from her reticule. By the time Harrow was brought back, his hands were empty. He bowed before Adrian and swore that he had delivered the book to Cecily's maid, never entering Eleanor's apartments. Eleanor recognized the calculation behind his frightened eyes. Silas had chosen a servant whose livelihood could be destroyed by a single accusation, and Harrow had chosen survival. The search proceeded under the conditions Eleanor had demanded. Mrs. Finch accompanied Lady Cecily and the magistrate's wife, while 2 footmen carried Eleanor's trunks into the centre of the west drawing room. Adrian, Silas, Rowe, Mr. Bell, and the magistrate waited at the open doors. The first trunk contained gowns and gloves. The second held correspondence, household receipts, and Eleanor's childhood prayer book. Nothing improper appeared until Lady Cecily lifted a folded travelling cloak from the third trunk. Beneath it lay the missing black folio. Mrs. Finch whispered that she had packed the cloak herself and had seen nothing beneath it. Silas answered that loyalty had plainly made her blind. Eleanor approached the trunk, but the magistrate barred her from touching the evidence. Rowe opened the folio with a handkerchief wrapped around his fingers. Anne Vale's unfinished sonata remained inside, together with several pages of private correction marks. Concealed within the back cover was the original Blackmere security, whose number Eleanor had reconstructed from the piano fragments. A small brass matrix bearing Adrian's ducal seal lay beside it. Rowe compared the matrix with the embossed seal on the duplicate recovered from the strong room. "This instrument could have produced the false certificate," he said. "Her Grace possessed the stolen original, the means of copying His Grace's seal, and a private system for arranging the fragments inside the piano. Mr. Bell supplied her access to the instrument. The explanation is no longer difficult." The magistrate asked Eleanor whether she denied owning the folio. "It belonged to my mother, and was stolen from my cabinet before the concert. Yet it was discovered in a locked trunk to which you alone held the key." Silas gestured toward the key ring Eleanor had surrendered in the library. "A ring left unattended upon a desk, while half the household moved through the corridor," she replied. Rowe then removed a folded document from between the final pages. It was the alleged marriage promise to Elias Wren, bearing Eleanor's signature and a date 6 months before she wed Adrian. A second page, supposedly written by Elias, described their intention to conceal the agreement until he had earned enough to claim her. The language echoed phrases from Anne's sonata and referred to the same reversed notes found inside the piano. The trap was elegant because every clue Eleanor had uncovered had been turned against her. Her knowledge of the music became proof that she had designed the code. Her insistence upon opening the piano became an attempt to control the discovery. Her protection of Mr. Bell became evidence of conspiracy. Even the broken cabinet supported Rowe's claim that she had staged a theft to explain why the folio appeared in her luggage. Adrian read Elias's supposed letter twice. "Did you love him?" The question was so painfully human that Eleanor almost forgot the room surrounding them. "He was my teacher. He was nearly 40 years older than I, and loved my mother until the day he died." "That is not an answer. It is the only answer the truth permits." Adrian held out the marriage promise. "This is your signature. It resembles my signature. It contains memories no stranger could know. Because someone entered my cabinet and read my mother's papers. You ask me to believe that Silas corrupted my solicitor, forged 2 letters, stole a security, copied my seal, altered a piano, threatened Bell, planted a folio, and deceived an entire room, all to remove you from a marriage you claim was never in danger." Eleanor met his gaze. "Our marriage was in danger the moment you chose accusation before inquiry." His face closed. The magistrate advised that Mr. Bell be detained, and Eleanor confined separately until the documents could be examined by an independent clerk. Adrian agreed. Mrs. Finch protested, and he ordered her removed from the West Apartments. That decision inflicted more than humiliation. It broke Eleanor's only reliable chain of witnesses, placed Bell's freedom at risk, and returned the evidence to men whose honesty was already in question. As a constable escorted Mr. Bell away, the old man looked toward the original security and called out, "The corner has been cut." Rowe immediately covered the document. Eleanor had seen it too. A tiny triangular piece was missing from the lower edge, an old banking custom indicating that a certificate had been presented for redemption. Yet the reverse side carried no payment stamp. The security had been cut in preparation for a transaction that had not yet occurred. Eleanor asked to examine the North account register once more, but Adrian refused. "There will be no further investigation conducted by you." She was taken to the blue morning room, where the windows were latched and a footman stationed outside. The room contained no writing materials except a discarded concert program. Eleanor read the list of patrons, instruments, and financial subscribers until one name caught her attention: Ashcombe Agricultural Bank, which had guaranteed all 12 Blackmere Northern Improvement securities. A note beneath the bank's advertisement stated that bearer certificates presented before noon would be honoured from the estate reserve. The fragments hidden in the piano had come from only one duplicate. 11 others could already be circulating. If they were presented together, the North account would be emptied. If Blackmere failed to honour them, the bank could seize the northern land, pledged as security. Hundreds of tenant families would lose their leases, while Adrian and the magistrate concentrated upon a folio planted in her trunk. The accusation was not designed merely to imprison Eleanor, it was designed to keep everyone inside Blackmere House until noon. The guard outside the blue morning room refused Eleanor's first request to see Adrian and ignored her second. At 7 o'clock, hurried footsteps crossed the entrance hall below, followed by the arrival of a carriage driven hard enough to scatter gravel against the windows. 10 minutes later, Adrian entered without knocking. He carried the concert program Eleanor had left upon the table, and his face had lost all colour. 11 Northern Improvement securities were presented to Ashcombe Agricultural Bank at 6 this morning, he said. Their total value is £55,000. The reserve contains less than 20,000. Eleanor asked who had presented them. A clerk acting for the Northshire Land Company. The certificates are payable to the bearer, so the bank is not required to identify the owner. And if payment is refused, the company may invoke the mortgage covenant and take possession of the northern farms. At noon, Adrian stared at her. How did you know? Eleanor pointed to the advertisement in the program and explained the cut corner on the security planted in her folio. The certificate had been prepared for redemption before it was supposedly discovered as evidence of her theft. Someone expected the bank to honor an entire series that morning and had placed the 12th original in her trunk so that any later investigation would lead back to her. Adrian paced once across the room. The bank manager says every certificate carries my seal and the signatures of both trustees. Silas is one trustee. The other was my late uncle. His signature has been used for 20 years. Then the bank sees lawful instruments. The magistrate sees a thief already confined, and your solicitor can advise immediate payment without appearing dishonest. Adrian stopped moving. For the first time, he looked not merely uncertain, but ashamed. I prevented you from examining the register. Yes. And separated you from the only witnesses who supported you. Yes. She did not soften the truth to relieve him. If you wish to repair that mistake, release Mr. Bell and return Mrs. Finch to me. Then take us to the bank. The magistrate objected when Adrian brought Eleanor downstairs. He warned that allowing a woman accused of stealing securities to inspect 11 more would expose Adrian to ridicule and might compromise the prosecution. Silas argued that the northern lands should be surrendered temporarily, rather than risk the Duke's remaining fortune upon Eleanor's theories. Once the certificates are paid, Eleanor said, the money cannot be recovered from an unnamed bearer. Once the lands are seized, their records can be destroyed or altered by the new owner. Delay benefits only the person who prepared this morning. Rowe insisted that the bank could not legally refuse valid certificates. Eleanor agreed. It need not refuse them. It may require time to compare them with its own counterfoils and printing records, provided the guarantor accepts personal liability for the delay. Adrian understood the cost before she named it. To suspend payment, he would have to pledge property unconnected to the disputed northern estate. If Eleanor was wrong, the bank could claim his London residence and the income from 2 unencumbered farms. Silas called the risk madness. Adrian looked at the annulment petition still resting in Rowe's leather case, then at the constable holding Mr. Bell. "Release him," he ordered. "Your Grace," the magistrate began. "If Bell attempts to flee, I shall answer for it. If the bank demands security, my personal property will answer for that as well." Silas moved close enough to speak beneath his breath. "You would hazard Blackmere for a woman who has made you a laughingstock." Adrian's reply carried across the hall. "I made her a spectacle before I tested the evidence. That error will not govern the next decision." It was not an apology, but it was the first time he had named his own act as wrong. Eleanor felt no sudden forgiveness. She felt something quieter and more dangerous, the beginning of belief that he might yet become a man capable of standing beside the truth when it cost him. 2 carriages left Blackmere House shortly before 8. Adrian travelled with Eleanor, Mrs. Finch, and the comptroller, Mr. Bell followed with the magistrate and 2 constables, while the ivory needle case containing the piano fragments remained sealed inside a locked dispatch box upon Adrian's knees. Silas and Roe were ordered to remain behind. As the carriages entered the market square, they encountered families arriving from the northern villages. Notices had already been posted at several farms, announcing that rents would be collected by new agents after noon. The seizure had been prepared before the certificates were presented. A tenant, named Samuel Price, stepped into the road and begged Adrian not to let strangers remove families who had worked the land for generations. Adrian promised nothing he could not yet guarantee, but he ordered his steward to gather every notice and record the names of the men posting them. At Ashcombe Agricultural Bank, the manager, Mr. Giles Mercer, met them in the counting room. He was neither corrupt nor brave. He was a cautious man, faced with instruments that appeared lawful, and depositors who would panic if the Duke publicly denied his own securities. He agreed to suspend payment only after Adrian signed a personal indemnity, placing Blackmere House in London and 2 farms at risk until noon. The bank doors remained open to avoid alarming customers, but the inner counting room was locked. 11 certificates were laid across a long green table. Each bore Adrian's embossed seal, the trustees' signatures, a blue crown within the paper, and 1 cut corner. The clerk representing the Northshire Land Company waited in an adjoining room, refusing to name his employer. Mr. Mercer produced the bank's counterfoil book, but every corresponding entry appeared proper. Silas's signature authorized each issue, while the late trustee's signature had been copied from older transactions so perfectly that even Adrian could not distinguish it. The officials had reached the limit of ordinary examination. Eleanor had not. Her mother had taught her that a series of copies betrayed its maker through progression. Pressure weakened, ink thickened, paper shifted, and repeated errors migrated across successive impressions. Musical copyists revealed themselves in the same manner as financial forgers. Eleanor arranged the 11 certificates by serial number and found that the blue crowns moved gradually from left to right across the sheets. The instruments had been produced in one continuous unauthorized printing, not issued separately across several years as the register claimed. More importantly, the order of that movement matched the reversed measures from Anne Vale's stolen sonata. The music was not merely a private code used to frame Eleanor. It was an index telling someone how to arrange the false securities. She asked Mr. Mercer to bring every document delivered with them, including envelopes, wrappers, and the claimant's written instructions. Then she requested that Mr. Bell examine the graphite residue along their cut corners, while Mrs. Finch recorded who touched each item. Adrian stationed the magistrate at the door, placed the sealed piano fragments beside the first certificate, and ordered the bank clock compared with his watch. It was 10 minutes past 10. Less than 2 hours remained before the northern estate changed hands. Eleanor drew the concert program toward her and placed its list of musical patrons beside the 11 serial numbers. "Do not question the claimant yet," she said. "First we shall discover which name he expects us never to read." Eleanor began with the 11 issue dates printed in the bank's counterfoil book. They appeared to span 6 years, yet the movement of the blue crowns proved that the papers had passed through the same frame in a single sequence. The dates, therefore, were not records of issuance but instructions. She translated their months into musical intervals and compared them with the numbered patrons in the concert program. Each interval directed her to a different line. The selected names seemed unrelated until Mrs. Finch read their first letters aloud. N-A-T-H-A-N-R-O-W-E. The final certificate pointed not to a patron, but to the heading beneath the list, Solicitor to the Fund. Adrian stared at the name. Roe prepared the concert program. Mr. Mercer opened the bank's subscription file for the Northshire Land Company. Its account had been established 3 months earlier by an unnamed representative whose references were certified by Nathan Rowe. The company's address was a vacant warehouse near the Eastern Docks, and its initial deposit consisted of 12 equal sums transferred from musical charities under Blackmere patronage. Eleanor examined the claimant's written instructions. The black wax sealing the envelope contained a strand of gold thread identical to the fibre pressed into the false order from the piano. Mrs. Finch recorded the comparison while Adrian broke the seal on the ivory needle case. Mr. Bell placed one fragment beneath a magnifying lens beside the cut corner of the first certificate. Both carried the same mixture of graphite and amber-coloured resin. "Piano technicians mix resin with graphite when a mechanism slips," he said. "But this is not mine. I use beeswax." Whoever cut these certificates handled the material used to restrain the hammers. 2 earlier details had joined into one chain. The gold thread came from the ribbon binding Eleanor's stolen folio, while the graphite mixture connected the false securities to the altered piano. Mr. Mercer could no longer dismiss the similarities as coincidence, but he warned that they did not invalidate the Duke's seal or prove who had manufactured the instruments. The claimant still held a legal right to demand payment. Eleanor asked to see him. The clerk was brought from the adjoining room under the magistrate's supervision. He gave his name as Peter Dane and claimed to know nothing about the Northshire Land Company beyond the instructions delivered to his lodging. His coat was cheap but new, and the mud upon his boots had dried to a reddish crust, unlike the dark streets surrounding the bank. Adrian recognized it as soil from the road beside Blackmere's eastern carriage house. Dane insisted he had never visited the Duke's residence. Eleanor placed the concert program before him and watched his eyes move immediately toward the principal composition, rather than the list of performers. "You were told to arrange the certificates according to the altered measures," she said. "That is why they were presented in this order. If you were merely a hired clerk, you could not have known the sequence unless someone gave you either my mother's folio or a copy of last night's score." Dane denied it, but his hand closed over the 4th certificate, the first in the reversed musical order. Adrian noticed. Instead of threatening the man, he offered protection for a truthful account and prosecution if the bank paid forged securities upon his demand. Dane's resistance began to weaken. Mr. Mercer gave them a private records room while the magistrate prepared a statement. In the narrow corridor outside, Eleanor and Adrian were briefly alone. The strain of the night had deepened the lines beside his mouth. "When I saw Elias Wren's name," he said, "I stopped asking whether the evidence made sense." Eleanor waited. "My mother left my father for a violinist when I was 12. She did it publicly, during a concert held in this house. My father trusted his brother to protect the estate, while he pursued her across Europe. By the time he returned, half the fortune had been pledged, and every newspaper in London knew his shame. I learned that private betrayal becomes public entertainment if one hesitates. So you made certain you humiliated me before I could humiliate you." He did not defend himself. Yes. Eleanor felt the admission like pressure against a bruise. "Your past explains why you were afraid, Adrian. It does not explain why I was required to pay for that fear. It does not." He looked toward the counting room, where his signature now endangered hundreds of families. "I believed control was the same as protection. Silas encouraged that belief because it made me easy to direct." Eleanor told him what she had never said during their 3-year marriage, that she had accepted their arranged union without expecting passion, but she had expected fairness. His reserve had seemed safer than charm. She had built a life inside the spaces he neglected, preserving music, aiding tenants' daughters, and planning her academy, only to learn that his respect vanished the moment trust demanded courage. "If we save the estate," she said, It will not restore what you destroyed in the concert hall. I know. Do you? I am beginning to understand that I do not yet know the full measure of it. There was no declaration between them, only a painful honesty neither had managed before. When they returned, Dane asked that his wife and young son be taken under protection before he spoke. Adrian sent 2 bank guards and his own steward to their lodging. The choice consumed precious time, but Eleanor supported it. A frightened witness would remain silent if truth endangered innocent people. At 11 o'clock, Dane began his statement. Rowe had hired him to establish the Northshire Land Company and present 12 securities. 11 were to be redeemed at the bank, while the 12th would be delivered to Blackmere House inside a black folio. After payment, Dane was to sign the northern lands to an unnamed purchaser whose identity Rowe would reveal that afternoon. He had received the certificates from Silas in the Eastern Carriage House shortly before the concert. The missing music folio had been lying open on the table beside them. Dane signed the first page, then hesitated before naming the intended purchaser. A bank messenger entered, with news from his family's lodging. The guards had found the rooms empty, and a chair overturned. Dane lurched to his feet. They have them. The magistrate ordered the doors secured, but a commotion rose in the public hall. Silas had arrived with Rowe, Lady Cecily, and 2 officers carrying an order from the Court of Chancery. The order froze Adrian's authority over the North account, on the grounds that he was acting under the influence of a wife accused of forgery. Dane looked through the glass panel and saw Rowe watching him. Before anyone could stop him, he seized his half-written statement and thrust it into the records room fire. As the paper curled into flame, Silas smiled. He had discovered not only that Eleanor had reached the bank, but exactly how close she had come to proving everything. Silas entered the counting room as though he already owned it. Rowe placed the chancery order before Mr. Mercer and explained that Adrian's decisions concerning the northern securities were suspended until the court determined whether Eleanor had manipulated him to conceal her own forgery. The order appointed Silas temporary controller of the North account and directed the bank to honor any instruments certified by both trustees' records. Adrian challenged the order, but the 2 officers confirmed its seal and warned that obstruction could be treated as contempt. Dane, seeing no sign of his family's safety, withdrew everything he had said. He claimed Eleanor had threatened him with prosecution and dictated the burned statement. The magistrate, who had heard only fragments before the fire, refused to testify to words he could no longer verify. Silas demanded custody of the concert program, the counterfoil book, the sealed needle case, and the 11 securities. Mr. Mercer surrendered them under protest. When Mrs. Finch objected, one officer reminded her that interfering with court evidence could lead to arrest. Within minutes, every fragile link Eleanor had assembled rested in Rowe's leather case. Silas then produced a second affidavit, stating that the 11 securities had been lawfully issued over 6 years and signed in the presence of Adrian's late uncle. Rowe swore that the duplicate found in the strong room was an innocent copy, prepared after water damaged the original register. The explanation was false, yet it offered frightened officials permission to obey. At 11:30, the bank began counting the reserve. Adrian had one remaining choice. He could preserve his unentailed property by accepting the annulment, allowing Eleanor and Belle to bear the accusation, and letting Silas manage the northern seizure. Instead, he asked Mr. Mercer to summon the bank's notary. Before Silas could prevent him, Adrian withdrew his annulment petition in writing and acknowledged Eleanor publicly as Duchess of Blackmere until a lawful court proved otherwise. He then placed his London house, 2 personal farms, and the annual income from an unentailed investment into a temporary trust for the northern tenants. The trust could not prevent the seizure of Blackmere land under the Chancery order, but it guaranteed food, housing, and legal representation for every displaced family. "You will ruin yourself for people who may no longer serve you," Silas said. Adrian signed the final page. "They were never created to serve me." His next words were quieter. "And neither was my wife." The statement did not erase the concert hall, the accusation, or the confinement, but it cost him property, family allegiance, and the protection of silence. Eleanor saw that he no longer supported her because he expected her to save his estate. He had acted when defeat appeared certain and no reward remained. At noon, the bank honoured the certificates. The North account emptied, the Northshire Land Company acquired the right to take possession, and Silas announced that he would convene a public meeting at Blackmere House that afternoon to install new land agents. Bondholders, tenants, charitable subscribers, and many guests from the previous evening would attend. He intended to turn the seizure into proof of his competence and Eleanor's guilt. Rowe ordered Dane taken into protective custody, though everyone understood that the clerk had been returned to the men who controlled his family. The officers escorted Eleanor, Adrian, Mrs. Finch, and Mr. Bell from the bank, without the documents they had examined. Rain had begun to fall over the market square. Families from the northern farms stood beneath shop awnings, reading notices that declared their leases subject to immediate review. Eleanor had promised herself that coincidence would never become a substitute for proof, yet proof now seemed to have been locked inside Rowe's case and carried away. In the carriage, Adrian asked what remained. "Our memories," Mrs. Finch said. "A court will call them loyalty." "The piano," Mr. Bell offered. "Silas will say I altered it." Adrian looked at Eleanor. "And the pattern in the paper. Without the certificates, it becomes an observation no one else can test." For several minutes, the only sound was the turning of the wheels. Eleanor pictured the blue crowns moving across the 11 sheets, each shift proving a continuous printing. She remembered Silas's affidavit. The certificates had supposedly been signed one at a time across 6 years in the presence of Adrian's late uncle. Rowe had created that claim because he believed the physical sequence was now beyond their reach. Then Eleanor recalled the single certificate found in the strong room. It had not been taken by the officers because Rowe had described it as an innocent office copy, unrelated to the redeemed instruments. It remained at Blackmere House, under the comptroller's seal. Its blue crown faced left, while the piano fragments from the unauthorized printing faced right. Earlier, Eleanor had assumed the difference merely distinguished an original from a duplicate. Now she understood the deeper error. The strongroom certificate bore the same serial number as the original planted in her folio, yet Silas's affidavit declared that only one instrument of each number had ever been produced. To explain both, Silas would have to choose which document he claimed Adrian's uncle had witnessed. Whichever one he chose, its paper, seal pressure, and cut corner could be compared with records already outside Rowe's control. The bank's notary had copied the complete description of the redeemed series before surrendering it, and Mrs. Finch had recorded the measurements in her witness notes. More importantly, the alleged letter from Elias contained the title of Anne's Black Folio, a title Eleanor had invented and entered in her catalogue 3 months after Elias died. The accusation of a secret marriage could not survive that impossible knowledge. Silas's scheme depended upon treating music, financial paper, and Eleanor's private records as separate matters. The public meeting would allow her to unite them. "He believes he has destroyed the evidence," she said. "Then let him believe it, until he has sworn to a version he cannot change." Adrian asked what she required. Eleanor told him not to challenge Silas's temporary authority, not to warn the magistrate, and not to retrieve Rowe's case. She asked Mr. Bell to restore the 4 altered hammers without removing the graphite traces. and Mrs. Finch to obtain the dated catalogue in which Eleanor had first named the folio. Adrian was to invite the bank notary, the comptroller, and every remaining concert guest to attend Silas's meeting. "He will accuse you before all of them," Adrian warned. "That is what I need. Last night he used 200 witnesses to silence me. This afternoon he must use the same witnesses to commit himself to the lie." As Blackmere House came into view, Eleanor looked toward the tall concert room windows. The piano remained inside, guarded and damaged, exactly where the scheme had begun. "Let him take the floor first," she said. "Then I shall ask him to choose which note he wishes to call the truth." Before entering Blackmere House, Eleanor divided what remained beyond Silas's control. Mrs. Finch took the dated catalogue to the magistrate and asked him to seal it after witnessing the entry naming Anne Vale's black folio. Mr. Bell restored the 4 piano hammers, but left the graphite and resin untouched, then locked the mechanism under seals signed by the comptroller, the bank notary, and 2 northern tenants. Adrian sent his steward, accompanied by bank guards and local constables, to search the eastern carriage house and every cottage along the red clay road where Peter Dane's boots had been muddied. The tenant trust documents were copied and placed with 3 separate attorneys so that no seizure of Blackmere papers could destroy them. At 4 o'clock, the concert hall filled again. Nobles who had witnessed Eleanor's humiliation occupied the gallery. Northern farmers stood beside bank subscribers and charity trustees below. Silas took the floor with Rowe at his right hand, and the chancery officers behind him. He announced that Eleanor had conspired with Elias Wren and Mr. Bell to steal an original security, manufacture duplicates, and hide evidence inside a piano using her private musical code. Her unlawful promise to Elias, he claimed, rendered her marriage to Adrian void and gave her a motive to seize enough money to escape before the deception became known. Silas then swore before the magistrate that all 12 Northern Improvement securities had been issued individually across 6 years, each witnessed by Adrian's late uncle and recorded honestly by Rowe. Eleanor waited until he had signed the declaration. "Is that your complete account?" she asked. "It is the truth." "And you had never seen my mother's black folio before it was discovered in my trunk?" "Never. You did not order the concert piano locked?" "No. You knew nothing of the altered notes before Mr. Bell opened the mechanism?" "Nothing. And the letter from Elias was written before my marriage," Rowe answered for him. "The date is plainly recorded." Eleanor approached the piano, but did not touch it. She asked Mrs. Finch to present the sealed catalogue. The magistrate read the relevant entry aloud. Eleanor had named the collection Anne Vale's Unfinished Sonata and Private Corrections 3 months after Elias Wren's death. Yet Elias's alleged letter used that exact title. A dead man could not have referred to a name that did not exist while he lived. Rowe claimed Eleanor might have added the title later, but the catalogue's paper bore the dated stamp of the London binder, and 2 earlier entries continued onto the same sheet without interruption. Eleanor next produced the inventory from the West Apartments. It named the black folio before Rowe claimed the cabinet had been opened. "You knew its title before the official search," she said. "Either you entered my locked cabinet or received the information from someone who did." Rowe blamed a servant, though he could not name one. Mrs. Finch then described the gold thread pressed into the wax of the false piano order. The same ribbon had bound the stolen folio, proving that whoever sealed the order handled Eleanor's private manuscript before the concert. Silas declared the thread insignificant. Eleanor invited him to explain why he had identified the piano as property of the Royal Musical Relief Fund when refusing to let Adrian break its lock. That ownership appeared in no public program and was known only to the person who arranged the temporary lock and insurance. Silas claimed Rowe had mentioned it casually. Rowe denied doing so, then realized too late that his denial had separated their accounts. Murmurs spread through the hall. Eleanor moved from access to method. Mr. Bell opened the piano under the witnesses' seals and demonstrated the 4 restrained hammers. The graphite resin mixture remained in the action. The comptroller produced the strong room certificate, bearing the same number as the original planted in Eleanor's folio. Mrs. Finch read her measurements of the fragments recovered from the piano, while the bank notary read his descriptions of the 11 redeemed securities. Their blue crowns shifted gradually across the sheets, proving that the papers came from one continuous production. They were not issued over 6 years, Eleanor said. They were printed together and assigned false dates afterward. Silas attacked before she could continue. He argued that Eleanor herself had supervised the music fund, possessed the coding system, and could have ordered the printing. Your Grace has shown how the fraud occurred, he told the room, but every step leads back to you, except the profit. Eleanor asked the charity trustees to read the transfers opening the Northshire Land Company's account. Every payment had been authorized through Rowe's office. The company acquired the northern lands for a fraction of their value, while Silas gained temporary control of the estate through the same crisis he claimed to solve. Silas insisted that the purchaser remained unknown and that no evidence connected him personally to the company. Eleanor agreed. That is why I asked you to swear before these witnesses. She returned to the piano and placed one hand above the 4 altered keys. You said I selected these notes as a private code. Tell us, then, how you knew they were a code before the mechanism was opened. Silas answered that he had learned it from Dane's statement at the bank. The statement you watched him burn. He told me before he burned it. You were outside the locked counting room. Rowe informed me. Rowe shook his head. I arrived with Lord Silas. I had not spoken to Dane. The contradiction settled over the audience. Silas's composure fractured. He accused Eleanor of arranging every witness and demanded that the magistrate arrest her before she further corrupted the proceedings. The magistrate refused. You have sworn that Dane identified her, he said. If the man confirms it, your statement stands. If he does not, you have committed perjury. Silas looked toward the chancery officers, but they no longer moved at his command. At that moment, the concert hall doors opened. Adrian's steward entered first, his coat stained with red clay. Behind him stood Peter Dane, supporting his trembling wife, while a bank guard carried the child Silas's men had hidden in an abandoned cottage near the eastern carriage house. Dane looked directly at the magistrate. My family is safe, he said. Now I will tell you whose securities I carried. Peter Dane's voice shook, but it carried to the gallery. Lord Silas Ashcombe gave me the securities, and Nathan Rowe created the Northshire Land Company to purchase the land for him. Rowe called him a paid liar. Dane answered by describing the eastern carriage house, the locked cabinet where the certificates had been stored, the music engraver's press used to reproduce their borders, and the table upon which Eleanor's black folio had lain open. Silas had discovered that Eleanor intended to send her mother's manuscripts to a publisher immediately after the concert. Before releasing them, she planned to reconcile every charitable payment made in Anne Vale's name. That examination would have exposed the money Rowe had diverted from musical charities into the Northshire Land Company. They therefore needed to discredit Eleanor, remove her from Blackmere House, and make her appear responsible for the forged securities before she reached the accounts. Rowe had copied the late trustee's signature from old deeds, while Silas used his lawful access to obtain Adrian's seal and original certificates. The false instruments were printed together, backdated across 6 years, and indexed through the reversed measures stolen from Anne's folio. The piano had been locked under Silas's name because the altered hammers served 2 purposes. They directed Dane to the order in which the securities should be presented, and they ensured that Eleanor's private musical system would implicate her if anyone discovered the fragments. Rowe forged the marriage promise, using phrases from Anne's manuscripts, and placed Elias Wren's name upon it, knowing Adrian's family history would make the accusation irresistible. Harrow then planted the folio, the original security, the brass seal matrix, and the forged letters inside Eleanor's trunk. Summoned before the magistrate, Harrow finally admitted that Silas had threatened to dismiss his father and evict his family unless he obeyed. Lady Cecily confessed that Silas had instructed her to confirm the story about the prayer book. She had believed Eleanor guilty and hoped Adrian would eventually marry her, but she denied knowing about the securities or Dane's abducted family. Her vanity had made her useful, though not innocent of the public cruelty she had encouraged. The evidence now formed an unbroken chain. The inventory proved Rowe knew the folio's private title before the official search. The dated catalogue proved Elias could never have used that title while alive. The gold thread connected the stolen folio to the false piano order. Mr. Bell authenticated the fresh graphite and resin inside the mechanism. The fragments, the strongroom certificate, and the bank notary's measurements proved that multiple instruments bearing the same numbers existed. The migrating blue crowns established one continuous printing rather than 6 years of lawful issuance. Dane identified the delivery, the company, and the intended purchaser. Harrow confirmed the planting of evidence, while Silas's sworn statements supplied the final contradictions. He had claimed no knowledge of the piano code, then described information he could only have obtained from inside the locked counting room or from his own plan. Rowe attempted to leave, but the Chancery officers seized his leather case. Inside they found the 11 redeemed securities, the sealed needle case, Dane's unsigned second page, and a draft deed transferring the northern lands from the Northshire Land Company to Silas for £1. The magistrate ordered Silas and Rowe arrested for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, kidnapping, and perjury. The bank froze the company's accounts before the redeemed money could be withdrawn. The Chancery order was suspended, the land transfer declared fraudulent, and every northern lease remained in force. Adrian chose not to dissolve the trust he had created for the tenants. He converted it into a permanent fund, overseen by elected representatives from the villages, rather than by the Duke alone. Then he faced Eleanor, before the same audience that had watched him condemn her. I accused my wife without allowing her to answer. I used my title, this house, and 200 witnesses to make my fear appear righteous. I confined her, separated her from honest witnesses, and treated her intelligence as deceit whenever it challenged my judgment. Her innocence does not lessen my responsibility. He withdrew every allegation, surrendered any marital control over Anne Vale's manuscripts, and executed a separate settlement, placing Eleanor's property, royalties, and future academy beyond his authority. He promised written corrections to every guest, newspaper, court, and charitable trustee that had received news of the annulment. Finally, he removed Eleanor's wedding ring from his pocket and placed it upon the piano, rather than upon her hand. You may leave Blackmere, remain here, forgive me later, or never forgive me. I will not make another decision in your name. Eleanor did not offer him immediate absolution. She moved into her mother's former home for 6 months and established the Anne Vale Academy for women copyists and music teachers. Adrian visited only when invited. He attended trustee meetings without presiding, restored the money stolen from the charities, testified against his cousin, and learned to ask questions before issuing commands. Their affection returned through ordinary acts rather than grand declarations. Accurate accounts delivered without interference, letters answered honestly, promises kept when no audience was present. When Eleanor finally chose to return to Blackmere, she retained her separate property, continued directing the academy, and took an equal seat in estate decisions. At the Academy's first public concert, 200 guests assembled once more. Anne Vale's sonata appeared on the program beneath her own name. Eleanor sat at the same grand piano that had once been locked against her, while Adrian stood beside her holding the pages. He did not announce her choice or touch the music before she was ready. "May I turn the page?" he asked. Eleanor looked at the ring she had chosen to wear again, then at the tenants, students, and friends gathered to hear a woman whose work had nearly been erased. She played the 4 notes that had once warned of deceit. This time they sounded clear. Only when Eleanor gave the smallest nod did Adrian turn the page.